Trust dies twice. First when you stop believing, then when you discover you were right. The apartment always smelled like coffee after 8 p.m. That was when David switched from his daytime blend to decaf, pouring it into the blue mug she'd bought him 3 Christmases ago from a ceramic shop in Portland. The mug had a chip on the handle now. He still used it every night. She'd watch him from the kitchen island, her own tea cooling between her hands, and think about how marriages were made of these small consistencies. The same mug, the same spot on the couch, the same goodnight routine that ended with his phone face down on the nightstand, always face down, charging until morning. She never questioned it. He worked in corporate consulting, managing clients across 3 time zones. Privacy was protocol, he'd explained early in their marriage. Confidentiality agreements, sensitive information. She was a graphic designer. She understood professional boundaries. When he changed his passwords every few months, she didn't ask why. When he took calls in the car or stepped into the bedroom to respond to messages, she gave him space. Trust, she believed, was letting someone have rooms you never entered. Their life together felt solid in the way that routine things do. Thursday nights were Thai takeout. Saturdays, they ran the trail near the reservoir, his pace slightly faster than hers, but he always circled back. Sundays, they grocery shopped together, arguing gently over whether they needed more pasta or if the cabinet was already full. He remembered to buy her the good oat milk without being asked. She ironed his shirts on Monday mornings while he made breakfast. They had become a system, efficient and warm, a partnership that functioned like a well-maintained machine. The apartment itself bore evidence of their intertwined years. Her design books stacked beside his business journals, his running shoes by the door, her studio clogs one shelf below, a photograph from their honeymoon in Greece framed on the wall, both of them sunburned and grinning, standing on a cliff with the Aegean behind them. She passed it every morning without really seeing it anymore. That's what happens to evidence of love when love becomes routine. It stops announcing itself. By the time the leaves changed that October, she had stopped noticing how often he checked his phone during dinner. Or maybe she noticed but decided not to see. There's a difference. She'd catch him smiling at the screen sometimes, a soft expression she recognized from their early days, and she'd tell herself it was a funny message from his brother or a meme from one of his college friends. People smile at their phones. It doesn't mean anything. But some nights, lying beside him in the dark, she'd hear the faint buzz of a notification and watch the blue glow illuminate his face as he tilted the screen away from her. She never asked. Trust, she reminded herself. Professional boundaries, the space she'd always given him. The night it happened, she'd been working late in her studio, the second bedroom they'd converted 3 years ago, walls painted the gray she'd chosen, her desk positioned to catch morning light. A branding project was due Friday, and she'd been refining a logo for hours, her back aching, eyes dry from the screen. David had already gone to bed. She could hear the faint hum of the white noise machine through the wall, the sound he needed to sleep, though she never had. When she finally shut down her computer, it was past midnight. The apartment was dark, except for the bathroom nightlight and the street lamp glow through the curtains. She moved quietly through the hallway, careful not to wake him, stopping in the kitchen for water. That's when she saw it. His phone on the counter, not the nightstand. He must have left it there after his last call. The screen was dark, resting face up beside the fruit bowl, which was unusual. He never left it face up. She picked it up to bring it to him. Just that. Just the simple gesture of carrying her husband's phone to the bedroom so he'd have it in the morning. Her thumb brushed the screen accidentally, and it lit up with a message preview. Her face must have been at the right angle, the right distance, because suddenly the lock screen vanished and she was looking at his home screen, fully unlocked, as if the phone had recognized her as him. Face ID. She'd forgotten he'd registered her face years ago, back when they first got married, when sharing access felt like intimacy rather than invasion. He must have never removed it, or maybe he had and added it back during one of his updates. Either way, the phone had opened for her, and now she was standing in the kitchen at 12:30 a.m., holding proof of her husband's life. The notification was still visible at the top. A message from a contact labeled Consulting Group. The preview read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Room 342. Her heartbeat didn't race. It stopped, then started again slowly, heavier. She told herself it was work. A late meeting. Consultants traveled. They had conference rooms and hotels. The heart emoji beside the message meant nothing. People used emojis casually now, even professionally. She would set the phone down. She would walk away. Instead, she opened the message. The chat history scrolled back weeks, months, messages sent during the day while she worked in her studio, messages sent late at night after he'd kissed her forehead and said he was tired, messages that began professionally, got the presentation ready and Thursday works for the call. And then, somewhere in July, shifted. Thinking about you, miss your laugh, can't focus. She scrolled faster, her breath shallow. Photos appeared, not explicit but intimate. A selfie taken in a hotel bathroom mirror, a video of someone laughing, a message thread that read like a conversation between two people falling into something they both knew was wrong but couldn't stop. The contact name was a lie. There was no group, just two participants. David and a number saved as M. She scrolled to the most recent exchange, sent 2 hours ago while she'd been finishing her logo design. Almost there. Text when you park. Already here. 3rd floor. Can't believe we're doing this in your city. I know. Feels dangerous. That's what makes it better. The hotel name was embedded in an earlier message. She recognized it immediately. The boutique place 4 blocks away, the one they'd walked past a dozen times on their way to the reservoir trail. She checked the time. Nearly 1 a.m. now. The reservation had been for tonight, just hours ago. Maybe he was still there. Maybe he'd gone, come home, climbed into bed beside her, and she'd never known. She set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. The kitchen was silent, except for the refrigerator's hum. Outside a car passed, headlights sweeping across the ceiling. She looked at the blue mug in the drying rack, the one he used every night. The chip on the handle seemed suddenly unbearable. She didn't confront him that night. She returned to her studio and sat in the dark, the phone still on the kitchen counter where she'd left it. When morning came, he found it there and carried it to the bedroom, asking groggily why it wasn't charging. She told him she'd forgotten. He kissed her cheek, called her his sleepy girl, and went to make coffee. Breakfast unfolded like it always did. Toast, eggs, the radio playing NPR in the background. He scrolled through his phone while eating, smiling occasionally at something on the screen. She watched him across the table and wondered how long he'd been smiling at messages from someone else. Wondered if he'd showered when he came home last night, or if some trace of another person still clung to him while he climbed into their bed. "You okay?" he asked, glancing up. "Tired," she said. "Long night working." He nodded, already looking back at his screen. "You're always pushing yourself too hard." She wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, she finished her tea, rinsed her mug, and told him she had errands to run. The days that followed felt like performance. She moved through her routines, responding to client emails, refining designs, attending video calls, while a separate version of herself cataloged evidence. She noticed things she'd trained herself not to see. The way he angled his phone away when a notification arrived. How he'd started going to the gym 3 times a week instead of 2. A new cologne in the bathroom, subtle and expensive. Receipts for restaurants she'd never been to, tucked into his jacket pocket. She checked his phone twice more over the next week, waiting until he was in the shower, her hands shaking as she held his face close to the screen to unlock it. The messages continued. Good morning texts. Plans for another meeting? An inside joke she didn't understand. References to a coffee shop she'd never heard him mention. She learned the person's name eventually, though it hardly mattered. Maya, M. Someone he'd met through work, someone who lived 2 states away, someone who traveled to his city once or twice a month for consulting projects. The messages revealed a parallel relationship, complete with its own history, its own language, its own version of him she didn't recognize. This David sent poetry, made promises, stayed up late talking about his childhood, things he'd never told her. Or maybe he had, years ago, and she'd forgotten. Maybe she'd stopped listening the same way he'd stopped seeing her. She started watching him the way you watch a stranger, cataloging gestures, hunting for tells, the way he checked his messages before saying good morning, how his voice changed when his mother called versus when his phone buzzed with texts he didn't read aloud. She noticed he'd stopped reaching for her in bed, or maybe she'd stopped reaching back. It became impossible to remember which had come first, the distance or the affair, whether the affair was the cause or the symptom of something that had already broken. One evening in late October, she stood in the kitchen making dinner while he sat at the island responding to emails. The familiar sound of his keyboard, the smell of garlic and olive oil, Everything utterly normal, except for the fact that she now knew he was lying, had been lying, would keep lying unless she stopped him. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice steady. "Long," he said. "Client call ran late." She stirred the pasta. "Which client?" "The one I've been telling you about. The restructuring project." He hadn't been telling her about any project. Or maybe he had, and she hadn't listened. She couldn't trust her own memory anymore. Every past conversation now seemed like a potential fiction. "Do you ever think about what would happen," she said carefully, "if we stopped being honest with each other?" He looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Just hypothetically, if one of us kept something from the other. Something important." "We don't do that," he said, and his voice carried the gentle certainty of someone who believes his own lies. "That's not us." She wanted to drop the pot. She wanted to scream, "Who is Maya?" and watch his face rearrange itself into guilt. Instead, she served the pasta, poured the wine, sat across from him at the table they'd picked out together 4 years ago, and ate in silence while he scrolled through messages from someone else. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. She hadn't planned it. Planning would have required deciding what she wanted: closure, confession, or simply the end of pretending. Instead, it arrived naturally, the way inevitable things do, when she could no longer hold the knowledge inside her body. They were in the bedroom. He was packing for a work trip. Detroit this time, or maybe Chicago. The city's all blurred together now, folding shirts into his carry-on while she sat on the bed watching him. The evening light came through the window at a slant, catching dust in the air. "I need to tell you something," she said. He glanced over, still holding a folded shirt. "Yeah?" "Your phone unlocked for me a few weeks ago. Face ID, I saw your messages." The shirt remained suspended in his hands for 3 seconds. Then he set it down carefully in the suitcase, his movements deliberate, controlled. "What messages?" he asked, but his voice had already changed. Flatter, cautious. From Maya, silence. The white noise machine hummed in the corner, a sound she'd heard every night for years and would now forever associate with this moment. "It's not what you think," he said. She almost laughed. "What do I think?" "It's complicated." "Is it?" He sat down on the edge of the bed, not close enough to touch her, his hands clasped between his knees. She noticed he didn't ask which messages she'd seen, didn't try to deny specifics. He just sat there, looking at the floor. "How long?" she asked. 6 months, maybe 7. "Do you love her?" "I don't know." "Do you love me?" He looked at her then, and his eyes held something she couldn't name. Not quite guilt, not quite relief, maybe just exhaustion. "I don't know that either." The honesty of it was more devastating than lies would have been. She had expected him to fight for her, to swear it meant nothing, to beg forgiveness. Instead, he sat on the edge of their bed and admitted he was lost. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "I didn't want to hurt you." "You hurt me anyway. You just made me hurt alone." He nodded slowly. "I know." Outside, a siren passed. The room darkened as the sun dropped below the buildings. Neither of them moved to turn on the light. "Do you want to leave?" she asked. "Do you want me to?" "I asked you first." He was quiet for a long time, then, "I don't know what I want. I just know I can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Pretending." She understood then that he wasn't talking about the affair. He was talking about their marriage, about the routines they'd built to avoid looking at each other too closely. The Thursday Thai food, the Sunday groceries, the carefully maintained system that had become a substitute for intimacy. "Then don't," she said. He looked at her, confused. "Don't pretend anymore. Just go." "You're asking me to leave?" "I'm giving you permission to want to." He stood slowly, picked up his carry-on, and walked toward the bedroom door. Then he stopped, turned back. "I never meant for this to happen." "I know," she said. And she did. That was the worst part. She understood exactly how love could decay, how loneliness could become justification, how two people could drift so slowly apart that neither noticed until they were already living separate lives. He left. Not forever, not that night. Just for the business trip he'd already planned. but they both knew he wasn't coming back the same way. Maybe he wouldn't come back at all. She sat on the bed after he'd gone, listening to the white noise machine, and realized she didn't miss him yet. Maybe she'd been missing him for years. The apartment felt larger after that night. Not emptier, larger. Sounds traveled differently. Her footsteps echoed. The refrigerator's hum seemed louder, or maybe she simply noticed it now that she wasn't filling silence with pretending. He came back from the trip, and they had the practical conversations that follow rupture. Who would keep the apartment? How to divide the furniture? Whether to tell their families or let them discover it slowly through absence. They were civil, almost kind. No one threw dishes, no one wept in doorways. They simply began the process of untangling 6 years of intertwined life. He moved his things out over 3 weekends, carrying boxes to his car while she stayed in her studio with the door closed. She didn't watch him leave. Watching felt like participation in something she wanted no part of. Maya never came up again. She was irrelevant by then. The affair had been a symptom, not the disease. What broke them wasn't his betrayal, but their mutual failure to stay curious about each other. They'd stopped asking questions, stopped staying awake to talk, stopped bothering to be interesting or interested. They'd become two people performing marriage without understanding why. The divorce papers arrived in April. She signed them on her design table, her signature neater than his, which felt like winning some small, meaningless battle. By summer, she'd rearranged the apartment, moved her desk to the living room where the light was better, bought a new coffee maker, replaced the sheets, sold the couch, and bought one that faced a different direction. She wasn't erasing him exactly. She was relearning the space without his shape in it. Sometimes she thought about the night his phone unlocked, how one accidental technological moment had unraveled 6 years. But that wasn't quite true. The unraveling had been happening all along. The phone had simply made it visible. She went on a few dates, awkward coffee meetings arranged through apps, conversations that felt like job interviews. She wasn't ready. Maybe she wouldn't be for a while. That felt acceptable. She'd spent so long being half of something that being whole on her own required practice. Her work improved. Without the performance of marriage, she had energy for attention. Her designs got sharper. Clients noticed. She raised her rates, took on projects she would have once declined. Late at night in her studio, alone with her screens and her music, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Present. She saw David once, 6 months after the papers were signed, at the reservoir trail where they used to run together. He was alone, moving slower than she remembered, his face tired. They nodded at each other, kept walking in opposite directions. No words, no need. She realized later that she'd been searching his face for regret or relief, some sign of how he'd narrated their ending to himself. But his face had shown only the same thing hers probably did. The neutral expression of someone who'd survived something difficult and was still figuring out how to carry it forward. A year after the divorce, she started dating someone new. A photographer named James who made her laugh and ask questions and didn't assume anything about who she was. They moved slowly. She told him about her marriage, the affair, the Face ID moment that split her life into before and after. He listened without trying to fix it, or minimize it, or compete with his own damage. He just listened. "Do you think you'll ever trust someone that way again?" he asked one night. She thought about it. "I don't know. I think I trusted him too easily. Or maybe I trusted the performance and never looked underneath." "What would you do differently?" "Stay awake," she said. "Pay attention. Ask questions even when the answers are uncomfortable." He nodded. "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's better than waking up one day and realizing you've been asleep for years." Some nights, alone in the apartment that was finally only hers, she thought about the alternate version of that night. The one where she'd never picked up his phone, where Face ID hadn't unlocked, where she'd remained unknowing, carrying that false security forward for months or years until it collapsed some other way. She couldn't decide which would have been worse, the sharp, sudden pain of discovery or the slow, dull ache of suspicion never confirmed. But mostly she thought about the blue mug with the chipped handle, the one he'd taken with him when he moved out. She wondered if he still used it every evening, if it still carried the ritual of their old life, or if he'd thrown it away and started over completely. She didn't miss the mug. She missed the version of herself who'd watched him drink from it and believed that small consistencies meant safety, that routines were evidence of love, that silence could be mistaken for peace. She knew better now. Silence was just silence. Peace required honesty, even when honesty hurt, especially then. Years later, someone would ask her about the marriage, and she wouldn't remember the exact sequence of events. The timeline would blur. She'd forget whether the affair lasted 6 months or 7, whether the confrontation happened in October or November. The specifics would fade the way pain fades, leaving only the shape of what was learned. But she would remember the phone lighting up on the kitchen counter, the moment before she picked it up when she still had the choice to look away. How her hand had moved almost independently, reaching for the truth even though some part of her already knew what she'd find. She would remember thinking in that instant that she should set it down, walk away, protect herself from knowledge. And then she would remember choosing differently, choosing to see, because ignorance wasn't safety. It was just another kind of lie. The truth had hurt. It had dismantled her life. But at least it was real. And in the strange, quiet peace that followed, she found something unexpected, herself. Not the self she'd performed for him or the self she'd imagined herself to be, but the actual person underneath all that careful pretending, flawed and uncertain and still learning how to be whole. The ending came without announcement, not as resolution but as recognition. Love hadn't died. It had simply shown her what it looked like when mistaken for something safer, smaller, more convenient than truth.